Hi, I'm Councillor Jenny Pagecroft.
And I'm Councillor Sam Davis, and we're here at the Queen Ediths pub on Wolfston Way, which has recently been voted the CAMRA pub of the year for the city.
Last year, Sam and I were both lucky enough to win the most votes in the elections.
So I've got another 2 years to run as your councillor, and Jenny's got another year to run, but there's a vacancy which will be sorted out in the elections to be held this year on the 5th of May.
We've enjoyed having a Hustings event since before I was elected, and we're really pleased that we can actually hold another one again this year.
So we've gathered together the candidates and created an opportunity for them to tell you about themselves and for them to be asked your questions by Chris Rand, who's the editor of the Queen Ediths magazine.
Thank you very much for that. Here's handing over to Chris.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for tuning in, and this is the Queen Ediths Cambridge City Council Hustings for 2022. We have all our 4 candidates here, which is wonderful to see. Last year, if you remember, was very exciting. We had all the council up for election, and so there were, I think, something like 14 candidates going for 3 places, and that was just for City Council, never mind County Council. So now we're back to normal, run-of-the-mill, one councillor up for election, which is much more manageable. So what I propose to do tonight, we haven't got a live audience as we've done in the past. We are just going to be talking to the 4 candidates here in the fantastic Queen Ediths pub, which has just been named Campaign for Real Ale's Cambridge City Pub of the Year, which is a wonderful thing to have in Queen Ediths, and we thank them very much for hosting us. It's busy as it ever is, so I hope you can hear everybody above all the very well behaved people we have in here, of course. The format for the evening will be, I've got the 4 candidates, we're going to ask them to introduce themselves and to you, and then we have some questions which have been submitted by Queen Ediths news readers, and we'll see how many we can get through, and my studio manager will wind me up if we go past about 45 minutes, because I'm sure nobody wants to be listening to us for that long. So, our 4 candidates here tonight are Jacqueline, Steve, Daniel and David. Shall we go left to right to do an introduce? You okay to go first, ladies first? so Jacqueline, if you could introduce yourself to everybody and what you're standing for and generally what you want people to know about yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jacqueline Whitmore and I'm standing for the Green Party in this ward. For the last 2 years I've been involved in developing the Green Party presence across the city. I stood as a candidate last year and I also designed all the literature for our campaigns across the city. My hope is to strengthen the green representation on Cambridge City Council. We already have 2 green councillors, so I'm hoping to improve that so we can deliver a strong, sustainable, environmental and social justice policy.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Steve.
Hi there, my name's Steve King, I'm the Labour Party candidate. I live locally, about 10 minutes away from this fantastic pub, with my wife, my 2 children, who both attended schools here in Queen Ediths. I work in international education, helping education systems around the world make improvements. And more locally, I'm a school governor and have been for a couple of local schools. And this is also my 2nd time standing here. And over the last 2 campaigns, I've spoken to hundreds of residents in Queen Ediths, and I love it. I really love this community. I think it's a wonderful place. I think it's unique in Cambridge that it does things like this, and it really has people that sort of look after each other and look out for one another. And a lot of the people I've spoken to, not all of them are going to vote for me. Some of them have given me a hard time about different things. Some of them have made it clear that they're disillusioned with politicians, both local and national, and that's fine. I can take it. Local residents should hold their councillors to account, and they should give them a hard time if they think that things aren't happening. And one of the things I want to do is really work with people on an individual level who've got issues, who've got problems and challenges that they've tried to solve but haven't got anywhere. And I'd like to be a voice for them. One of the names I hear most when talking on the doorstep is Sam Davies, actually. I think she's done an amazing job to be an independent councillor. Cambridge has a Labour-controlled council, but Queen Edith doesn't have representation on that group. And I think it would be great to have somebody from different parties working with Sam, with colleagues from the Liberal Democrats, to have a strong Queen Edith's presence and with a voice on the leading group. So I hope you'll consider voting for me on May the 5th.
Thank you, Steve. Daniel.
Hello, my name is Daniel. I am restanding for Queen Edith as your councillor. I've been sitting for a year, learning a lot, getting to know so much more about the city that I grew up in and represent. So I'm actually from Queen Edith, so I was born in Addenbrooke's in Rosie, and I actually grew up on Queen Edith's Way, and I still live locally in the heart of the community. And that's really the crux of why I'm standing, because I love living here, I love growing up here. I come to the pub with Queen Edith all the time. I actually am the quiz master at the quiz here sometimes, so it's a community I've grown up in and I love, and I really enjoy representing. It's been an absolute privilege over the last year to represent the community I grew up in.
Thank you very much, Daniel. And finally, last but definitely not least, David.
David live on Hills Road, around Cambridge for 55 years. My wife, we got our 60th wedding anniversary in August, which is lovely. 2 boys, not men now, in their 50s. One's senior microbiologist at Cambridge Design Partnership in Toft, and the other runs an events company, and he runs the Town and Country event at Parker's Peace a couple of times a year. I've just retired last month from 55 years as a management consultant to help companies improve, 20 years in manufacturing industry across Europe and North America. Then I decided I didn't want to get in the plane again. 10 years in the IT industry then, in and around Cambridge, helped Peter Doyle starting Pipex, UK's first internet service provider, and 25 years in the medical industry, helping small companies with innovative products get into the NHS, which is the most difficult job I've ever done. The medical profession is totally closed to new ideas. A doctor gets over 35, he doesn't listen to new ideas, and the NHS has no money for new products. It's an absolute disaster. Amazing companies, we just can't get them into the NHS. First time I've stood in Queen Edith, I've never been a councillor, I've never been involved in politics, so it's a new experience for me.
Thank you very much, David. Well, that's four great introductions. We've got some questions which have been sent in by readers of Queen Edith's News, and I've picked a few out and merged a couple together. As ever with these things, these are 4 people here who are putting themselves up to do something, which is a hard job. Being a councillor is not easy, and they're putting themselves up to do that. As ever with the Hustings in Queen Edith's, we like to keep our questions friendly and not too critical, and hopefully these aren't too taxing for you, but we'll give you a good idea of what people think. I think we'll probably mix it up the way we go around. I apologise if I don't get it quite right, but we'll see what happens. A general question maybe to start off with, and if we can start with Daniel because he's done the job. Daniel, what do you see as the main roles of a city councillor in particular, and what will your priorities be going forward from here?
Well, as I mentioned, it's been an absolute privilege being a councillor over the last year. Really, it's about helping people, and that isn't necessarily doing things entirely for them. I think in a lot of cases it can just be as simple as facilitating people to empower them to take action, whether it's, for example, letting residents know the right person to talk to resolve a matter, or it could be chasing up an officer who's relevant in the case. So really I see that as the main role, so helping people either through direct action or kind of just showing the way. I think also as as a public figure as well, there is also a duty to kind of be a voice of leadership, so to speak. So there are controversial issues that not everyone in the ward will agree with, whether that's let's say the expansion of Cambridge or congestion charge. Part of our role as a public figurehead is to make arguments so people can be informed when they make their decision, if they make their decision.
Thank you. Come back the other way this time, Steve. Next.
So I think it's at three levels, really, isn't it? You've got your citywide issues, your open spaces, housing, supporting local businesses, a little bit around transport. You've got those big picture issues, the environment, etc. Then you've got your ward issues, the things that everybody in the ward wants to see, like the new pavilion in Nightingale Park. Everyone wants to see that. Everyone wants to see that new developments are sustainable and work well for this community. And then the third piece, and the one that I'm most interested in, is working on, as Daniel said, is working on the individual level. And I've spoken to so many people here who've just they've kind of come up against a brick wall. So I spoke to a lady who, in her back garden, her daughter found needles in her back garden for her young daughter who was playing there, and she wanted she wants something done about that. She wants something to happen about that. I spoke to another lady who was very unfortunately, she was attacked in her own home, and she doesn't feel safe, and she doesn't feel safe in her own home, which someone the same age as my mother shouldn't happen anywhere. I spoke to a gentleman who got a knock on his door at 10 o'clock at night, and somebody kicked his wing mirrors in and sort of ran off, and again, not much was done about that. But there's more positive things as well. I spoke to a gentleman who really cares about the biodiversity at Ninewoods Nature Reserve, and he's done research on this, and he's written about it, and he's into it, and he cares about it, and I'd love to work with him. I knocked on the door of the mother of the landlady of this pub, and she talked about how proud she was that this pub had won an award, right? I spoke to a lady who's going to vote Conservative, but she says I'm a nice young man. I spoke to a lady who's built a library in front of her house, right? A small library for people to borrow books. And I've spoken to a man who just thinks it's too hard these days for young people like his son to find affordable housing. And so those people often, when they come up against bureaucracy and officialdom and everything else, they just don't feel like they're listened to. And they sometimes don't feel like they have a champion. And I'm good at that kind of stuff. I'm quite tenacious, and I'm good at finding and connecting problems to solutions. And whereas I couldn't promise to solve all problems, I'd really enjoy working with individuals at that level to see if we can help them and see if we can find a way to work themselves through to a better place.
Thank you very much. Jacqueline?
I think it is to speak to residents on an individual basis, and I think one of the main things is to respond to them if they have queries or questions or problems, respond to them immediately and quickly, so that's how they feel they're listened to. And when you have a caseload, you do have to get on with it, because you do have to work and do so that would be my thing. I mean, I've done a lot of counselling in Cambridge, not particularly in this ward, but you have spoken to a lot of residents as well. I get a lot of, some of them are very similar and some of them are very specific to certain areas. So I think it's responding quickly really, and being aware of where they come up, like that come up on social media, or we might get an email or phone call, whatever that might be.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. And finally, David, have you got anything to add to those fairly comprehensive answers about what you see as the roles of a city councillor?
Well, given my background and never been involved in the council, I mean, I've spent 55 years improving organisations, so I tend to be looking at the council and the processes to see how on earth can we make it better. Because you read so many stories in the paper of the blessed thing not working. You know, the money they spent on this roundabout was ridiculous. A guided busway over the Gogs, how on earth can anyone propose that? They're just crazy decisions, and I'd be trying to improve the process.
Thank you very much. So let's talk a bit more, a few more specifics then. And as you've mentioned, David, the guided bus and that sort of thing. Although that's more of a county council issue, as we're all aware, the green belt is also a planning issue and is very much relevant to city council. So. A question that was very popular in various forms of wording from readers of Queen Edith's News was, should we protect the green belt at all costs, or should we continue to hand over more of it for housing? Perhaps I could start with Jacqueline, because it has the word green in the question.
Well, we are the only local party to oppose the policy of growth at all costs. Every other party that I've heard of is just growth at all costs, just development, and we don't agree with that. I think the green belt should be protected. Once it's gone, it's gone. You can't get it back. So I think any building that is done, any building that has to be done, should be sustainable, and it should be affordable. There's not enough social housing. There's a lot of developments are just for profit. We believe in community and not for profit. And we want community to be built up, and that kind of thing. I think past developments have actually failed to address the housing affordability crisis. So a lot of our children won't be able to afford a house because the prices have been pushed up and there's not enough social housing. I'll go on to say that overdevelopment is having a very negative effect on communities, especially increasing the burden on already scarce and overstretched water supply. And the overstretching of our water supply will affect residents' quality of life in the long term. In the short to long term future, there will be scarcity of water, which is a basic function. We need water. So
Thank you.
It's a no really.
Okay, Steve, growth at all costs?
Yeah, I mean it's a premise I find difficult to accept, that should we build on the green belt or provide housing. I think we can quite often in these kind of questions we can and should do both. We should protect the green belt and provide housing. It's not a zero-sum game. What I really like, though, about what the Green Party often say is that they often try to find a different measure of how society is progressing, and it's not just about percentage points on GDP, it's about how happy people are, how people are feeling about their local environment, how people are happy with themselves and their families. I really respect that about the Green Party, and I like it. And I'm a great believer in trying to find this balance in I'm sure everyone's heard about, it's quite a bit of a buzzword these days, donut economics, where you've got to make sure that people's basic needs are met, and housing is definitely one of them, but that does not then encroach on the environment and everything else. And the gentleman I spoke to again about Nine Wells, he's not against building new housing, he's not against people having affordable housing, what he wants is for those things to happen whilst at the same time the biodiversity in a place like Ninemills is protected. I don't see any reason why that can't happen, and I don't see any reason why in a city like Cambridge, with all its intellectual power and might, can't find a way to do both of those things, provide for its housing needs and protect its green belt.
Okay. David, perhaps any thoughts on the green belt, and should we be looking after it more, or is it okay to build on it?
Well, I live on Hills Road, and morning and evening rush hour is horrendous. The rest of the time the road is clear. There are people coming in from villages and going out to villages. So if we develop in villages, we just increase the traffic problem. We must develop in Cambridge, and if that means the green belt going, then from my view it goes. Wars Causeway has been developed. That's sensible. We've got to develop people where public transport can take them into Cambridge, not cars.
And I think it was the last time Liberal Democrats were running the City Council when the last local plan gave us Wars Causeway developments. I think it was argued at the time that there was no alternative to go into the green belt. Do you think that's still the case?
Yeah, broadly speaking, yes. I think it's important to remember when we talk about the green belt, I mean, 50 years ago, or not quite 50 years ago, but certainly if we were on this site in the 1950s, it would look a lot different than it does nowadays. Cambridge is expanding. It's a place where people from around the world, not just the UK but internationally, want to move, and as Steve highlighted in his answer, we are not providing enough houses for the people that want to live here, and this is evidenced by young people especially being priced out of Cambridge, having to move to the outlying villages in order to get on the property ladder, especially when they want to start families. So as much as I don't think it is a zero-sum game, I think we should be both developing including on the green belt. I think we also need to take an approach where we can actually nurture nature and protect what is there. And actually, I think I've spoken to the chap that Steve has mentioned about the Ninemills estate, and I think if we actually embrace change and development, we can actually play a much more positive role in dictating how that development takes place and how green it is, for example. For example, we can continue to insist upon the open spaces policy that the council itself has set out. It's not necessarily on everyone's minds in Queen Edith ward, but in the northeast of Cambridge, there is a development plan, and the open space for that is much lacking compared to what the council thinks it really should be, and we try to hold the council to account for that. So I think if it is a case of do we build enough houses, or do we preserve the green belt, I have to say go for the houses because people need a place to live. But I think there is a way that we can develop what we already have, where we can expand as well onto the green belt, but also preserve parts of the green belt and preserve the natural features that we have.
Okay. Thank you very much. Interesting to have some divergence of thought there on that one, I think, and I think that will maybe interest quite a few people. A little bit of politics for a moment, if we may. And a question. One of the things that got me most interested in local politics was about 10 or 15 years ago when I saw a local councillor stand up at a council meeting over a local plan, actually, and make a very passionate speech arguing for something that I think most local residents really wanted, and it was very, very good. And then promptly an hour later voted against her own speech because that was her party line. That infuriated me, but I think a lot of people who know, or perhaps more au fait with party politics will see, well, sometimes that's the way it has to be. So the question is, would you be prepared to vote against your party line on an issue that had the potential to affect Queen Edith's perhaps negatively. David?
Well, forget Queen Edith. Boris should go. He's an absolute disaster. He really is, and he's got to go. I just don't understand why they haven't got rid of him already. The Rwanda decision is idiotic. I just cannot see what the Conservative Party is doing at the moment. They did a reasonably good job on the pandemic, but I'd vote against them every time if it was in my view.
Well, that's thanks very much. Perhaps Daniel, what are your thoughts on that?
I would absolutely vote against my party if it was something that was going to negatively impact Queen Edith. Or in fact, even if it was not just Queen Edith, if it was, I thought, against the interests of Cambridge and the people living here, I would vote against it. And yeah.
Jacqueline?
Well, I think I'm probably the only person here who can vote against their party, because the Green Party, we don't have a party whip, we can do what we feel is best. So I could, and it wouldn't be a problem, vote against, depending on what it was we want, and that's why we have that kind of sort of fluidity in the Green Party, so that we're not just always have to stick to what we're told all the time, so we can be more independent minded and do what we feel is best for our area.
Finally, Steve, someone who would probably still be, if elected, you would be part of the ruling party on the council, because I think Labour Party is still likely to hold after this election. We never know.
I think the one thing to remember is why the party whip is there, and the party whip is there so that the leadership of the council can have collective responsibility for the decisions it takes and can deliver with confidence on its priorities. So, for example, the reason why the Labour Party council leadership in Cambridge has been able to deliver on its ambitious council housing targets is because it has a unified voice. And the reason why we're ranked among the top 10 of all local authorities in the country on climate change is because we have a unified voice. Without that, you can't achieve those things. Without a collective voice, it is not possible. And that is why political parties exist, of course, so that we can do that. I think maybe tied up in the question, though, is a distrust of political parties. And I think the current political climate to which my friend just alluded to, I meet people all the time who are just disillusioned with politics. They think we're all the same. They think we're out on the take. They think we're in this to gain something, and we're not. What we want to do is do good things to help people, and sometimes that means working collectively as a group, and sometimes it means swallowing our pride and getting things done. Having said that, in extenuating circumstances, if there was something that was absolutely to the denigration of Queen Edith, then yes, of course. But I think that's unlikely.
A final question, which is a bit more political. Do you believe in increased council tax or reduced services? I mean, clearly the City Council, which you all hope to join, is going to continue to have an even more reduced budget. I think someone told me there's another £7 million to find at some stage soon. So something's got to give somewhere. So should residents be paying more to try and keep up services, or can we just reduce services further? Jacqueline?
Well, I think as reduced services would affect the most disadvantaged in the community, which would be all sorts of people, the poorest and people with disabilities, that sort of thing. I think it's very unfair to expect everyone else to gain from not having to pay more council tax. So in my mind, I think it has to be an increased council tax. I think they've had enough reduced services as it is, and enough has been cut, so
okay.
I think that's the answer.
Daniel, have you thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with improving council services by increasing council tax. Now, I don't necessarily think that means that there isn't scope to improve how services are provided, of course, but I think in general if we were able to increase funding through council tax and pay for better public services, or even, for example, pay more and increase the budget for retrofitting council housing stock, it might seem as though you might not personally benefit from that, but I think we all benefit from having a better atmosphere and reducing our carbon emissions collectively. And I don't think it's something that we can do individually. I think it is something that needs collective action.
David, any thoughts on council tax?
Well, the coalition government cut so much from public spending, 20% from councils, from the police service, from the legal system, prison service, and we're still suffering from that. That was an absolute disaster. So we've just got to get more spending. We've got to increase council tax, absolutely.
Thank you very much. Steve?
Again, I don't think it's a zero-sum game. I don't think it's either or thing. You increase council tax or reduce spending. I think there are things that you can do to make sure that the most vulnerable, the most needy people in our society have a fair rate. And I think it's entirely reasonable to expect those who have more to contribute more. That is not a surprising position from someone from the Labour Party. And we put that into action, the Labour Council actually. We've given quite generous council tax reduction schemes to those who need it most. And I think our priority would always be those people who are struggling. And we wouldn't necessarily want to see an even spread of how council taxes are levied or charged and spent. But remember this though, is that the council tax is not the council's money. It is the public's money, and the spending of that money should absolutely be done in the most responsible way possible and in the most effective way possible. Taking taxpayers' money is a very serious business, and spending it is a massive responsibility.
Thank you. So one more question, and perhaps we can wrap this up with a closing statement from each of you, because I think you can probably build this one into it. So it's just the final question which I've got here was a simple one, which was how will you communicate with residents? So if we could just go through and you could make a final wrap-up statement about why you would like people to vote for you, but also mention in that to talk about communication with residents and how you would like to do that. Perhaps we'll finish in the order we started. So Jacqueline.
I think for me, I'll communicate through, as it's more popular these days, through social media. Things like Facebook, you often see problems on there. I know one of our Green councillors recently picked something up on Facebook and responded in sort of almost lightning speed, which was very impressive because it was fed back to me. So I think that would be one of the things. So I think having your finger on the pulse of all the email and all the social media is good. I think I'd just like to wrap up by saying I just really feel that it's time there's more green presence in Cambridge and across the UK and across the world. I think it's just incredibly important.
Okay. Thank you very much. Steve?
One thing I wouldn't do is I wouldn't actually spend a huge amount of time on social media. I think Twitter and Facebook are increasingly divisive mediums, and they're increasingly tedious mediums through which to communicate, in my view. Although I do have a Twitter account, and of course, if I was elected councillor, residents are more than happy to find me there and to write about me there and criticise or contact me through that medium. The way I would communicate with residents is simply by using what I've got two of, which is ears, and what I've got one of, a bit less, which is a mouth. And I think it's about listening, I really do. And it's a cliche to say it. It's a cliche for anybody who's looking for political office to say that they're a listener. But I really believe that. And I think, it isn't difficult to find the email address of the council. It's not difficult to find their phone number. I would be approachable, findable, responsible, responsive, and I would love to spend time not necessarily communicating with people, but listening to them and figuring out what it is that's bothering them and finding ways to make their lives easier.
Thank you very much. Daniel.
I am contactable by phone, by email. My address is public information. I also have social media, and I have Lib Dem channels as well to contact me through. I'd like to kind of echo, there are limits to what social media can achieve and how contactable you are through social media. A lot of people in the community actually don't use social media or are not necessarily computer literate, so it is tricky for those people, and increasingly aspects of the community are frozen out of the political landscape because they don't have access to these things. So it is really important to get out there on the doorstep, and that's what I and my Lib Dem team have been doing all year, pretty much for the last decades or however long. And we're out there in the community, knocking on doors, listening to people, and listening is, like Steve said, really, really important to what we do. And there are a lot of problems that people have that can be solved if you're listening, and that's what we're set out to do.
Thank you very much. And finally, David.
Well, when we started the internet in about 93, 94 in the UK, we had no idea how it was going to develop. Really not. We were making it up as we went along. The first problem was selling it to companies. Because why should a company buy an internet when no one else had it? And one of the salesmen cracked it. He went to companies like BP and said, "What's your fax bill?" And it was like 150,000. He said, "Right, buy a connection, it'll come down to 10,000. We'll get your lawyers to sign up, and then big documents are sent to them." And that was the key. That's what started the internet in the UK. But we never knew we never had any idea the social media development. It just wasn't in our thoughts. We had websites, they were developed, football clubs and everyone had websites, individuals had email, but we never imagined what was going to develop in this horrible way. I'm not on social media on anything. I think it's a complete time waster and totally anti-democratic. And I've no idea how I'd communicate, because I've never been a councillor. I just haven't a clue. I'd take advice. But vote for me because I'm Conservative.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you to all four of our candidates who are once again in Queen Ediths are really great bunch of people. It's lovely to see all the parties putting forward candidates here, which doesn't always happen, and giving residents a really good choice of who to vote for. So if I had an audience here like we normally do, I'd ask for a big round of applause, but in the meantime, thanks for watching, and do go and vote next Thursday, or if you've got a postal vote, get it in the post as soon as you can. Monday, I would think, is about as late as you want to leave it. I believe you can take your postal vote along to the polling booth if you haven't sent it in time, so you can do that as well. So one way or another, take part in local democracy, do vote, and thanks for watching.